All right, everyone, thank you for joining us in our first virtual training series of 2020. My name is Dan Kovatz. I am the Executive Director of the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association. And tonight we have a really important session, and I'm glad we got so many people that are joining us this evening for it. We're on the verge of kicking off the petition season for the upcoming election cycle. And we're going to get into a do's and don'ts session of it. But before we get into that, and I turn it over to our trainers, want to kind of go over some of the ground rules for tonight's session. Everybody is going to be muted throughout the session. And if you have questions as we're going through, please put them in the chat. We will ask them as we're going. Couple of other ground rules. We've got a lot of people that are going to be on, so we ask everybody, please be respectful of each other while you're on the session. Be present during the session itself. So put your phone to the side. You can answer that text message or that email later. While you're here, the session itself should be about 45 minutes. So please just be present during the session. And the last is ask a lot of questions. We have a lot of experience just looking at the people that are joining the call here. We've got some seasoned elected officials and county chairs, and we've got some first-time precinct committee people that are going to be on here. No question is stupid. Please ask away, and we will ask them as we are going through this. So with that, I'd like to introduce our president from the County Chairs Association, Christina Zahorik, the chair of the McHenry County Democratic Party, to kick us off. President Zahorik.
Thank you so much, Dan, and welcome. Happy New Year to everybody. I'm glad to see everybody on the call tonight. Thank you for staying safe and healthy and making sure your friends and family are also staying safe and healthy as we kind of move through this, what is it, the third wave now of nonsense with this pandemic. I also want to say thank you to those of you who are stepping up to actually be on the ballot, as well as those who are helping those folks to get on. It is going to be another crazy election cycle. Part of that is due to the change in the dates of the year. But we're here tonight to make sure that we get all the pertinent information that you're going to need to know to make sure that you're able to stay on that ballot legally. Tonight with us, we have a good friend of the IDCCA, attorney Ed Mullen, and he is on tonight to answer all of our questions about this year's petitions. Hi, Ed. Thanks for taking the time tonight, and Happy New Year to you too. Happy New Year, Christina. It's very nice to be here again and excited to get started with the petition process. Given our delay with the extended primary period, so we would have started this process 4 months ago last year. So it's good to finally get moving. I've got a PowerPoint, but I just wanted to start off a little bit. Everyone who's here is either a candidate that wants to get on the ballot or working with a candidate that wants to get on the ballot. And obviously getting on the ballot is really important because if you're not on the ballot, you can't win. And so a lot of people in the petition process will ask me, can I do this? Is this okay? And they think about it from the perspective of what's legal and what's the minimum that they're required to do to get on the ballot. I want to shift that perspective a little as we go through this presentation, because your only purpose is not to get on the ballot, but it's to put together nominating petitions and nominating papers that are so good that you're not going to get challenged. Because the challenge process and the objection process is very time consuming, it's costly, it puts a wrench in the momentum of the campaign. Instead of having people knocking on doors, you've got people chasing affidavits of petition signers. You really want to avoid an objection. So the perspective I want to go into this presentation, and I want you all to go into the petition collection process, is thinking not so much what is the minimum I need to do to get on the ballot, but what are the things that I can do to make sure that someone looks at my petitions and says, I'm not going to even bother challenging these because they are so good. And that's the perspective I think is the better perspective to look at this than just what are the minimum legal requirements to get on the ballot. But we'll talk about both of those. So give me just a second to pull up the PowerPoint. All right. There we go. All right, so we are going to start tonight talking about petitions, because you need to have petitions to get on the ballot. I was having a conversation with former Congresswoman, listening to her speak, former Congresswoman Donna Edwards from Maryland, and she said what she had to do to get on the ballot in Maryland was write a $100 check. And no petitions at all. But here in Illinois, every single person who wants to get on the ballot has to file nominating papers or nominating petitions, and you need a minimum number. The minimum number that's required varies by office. So if you're running for Congress this year, your minimum is 400 signatures. If you're running for Metropolitan Water Reclamation District in Cook County, you have to file 5,770 petition signatures that are valid. So the number of signatures that you have and the process varies very much by office. And so each office, you need to figure out what your minimum is. In addition, some offices have maximums. So if you're running normally, not this year, for state representative, you need a minimum of 500 and a maximum of 1,500, which means the State Board of Elections will only look at the first 1,500 signatures that you submit to determine whether or not you have enough valid signatures. And so there are strategies that you'll employ, and we'll talk a little bit about those later, if you have a maximum as well as a minimum. As Christina said at the beginning, the circulation and filing period has changed this year. There were some issues with the census that delayed the redistricting, and that forced the legislature to move the primary date from March to June. So we have a primary in June 28th, so our circulation period has changed. That circulation period is January 13th of 2022 through March 7th or March 14th of 2022. So you are able to file your petitions as soon as the election authority that you need to file with opens on the morning of March 7th. A lot of people do that because that will put you in a lottery with all of the other people who filed at the same time to potentially be at the top of the ballot, which is something that has been shown to give an advantage to the candidate who's at the top of the ballot. If you're the only one that files at the beginning of the filing period, then you will be automatically at the top of the ballot. To answer a couple questions that come up, Steve, I'm going to answer that question in just a minute. And in terms of relying on the candidate guide, particularly for the state offices, you know, the candidate guide is pretty reliable, but I always go to the statute that's cited in the candidate guide and double check the math to make sure that I agree with those numbers. So you can file on March 7th in the first thing in the morning and get into the lottery to be first on the ballot. You have until the end of business on the 14th to file petitions as well. People have different strategies for whether they want to be first on the ballot. Some people want to be last on the ballot. They think that that is a good place for them to be on the ballot. Other people want a shorter period of time for candidates to be able to look at their petitions and object to them. So if you file your petitions on March 14th, people reviewing your petitions have a week less to determine whether the signatures are valid or whether there are any issues of fraud. So there's a lot of different considerations that go into deciding whether you file at the beginning of the period or at the end of the period, but I think most people aim for filing at the beginning of the period. And so you want to build that into your petition circulation calendar. Because the primary is moved, we now have a 60-day window to circulate petitions. Previously, the window was 90 days. So as a result of that, the legislature has changed the number of petitions required for a lot of offices and reduced it by approximately a third, so that you only have to get 2/3 the number that were normally required. So for example, I mentioned earlier that state representatives typically had to get 500. They reduced that to 400. The maximum was typically 1,500. They've reduced that to 1,000. But what you'll notice is that they didn't reduce it proportionally. So while normally you would have to have 33% of your signatures be good, which is 500 out of the 1,500 you submit, now you have to have 400 out of 1,000 be good. So the validity rate that's required has gone up from 33% to 40%. And that's not consistent with all of the other offices. So state senate is a different percentage, state governor is a different percentage, and other offices are different percentages. So you need to look, not only if you have a minimum and a maximum, you need to figure out what rate your petitions need to be good. And remember, the minimum number of signatures is never enough. If you are required to get 400 petition signatures and you get 400 signatures, I am 100% going to guarantee you that some of those signatures are not going to be valid. We'll talk about what makes a signature valid or invalid in a little bit, but I guarantee you, you need to get more than the minimum. The rule of thumb is generally 3 times the minimum. And there are some instances where, for instance, state representative, where you can't file 3 times the minimum, but that should be your internal campaign goal, is approximately 3 times the minimum that are required. So let's talk now a little bit about how we circulate petitions as a campaign. We need circulators to circulate the petitions, and those people are required to be 18 years of age, and they're required to be US citizens. There are no other requirements. They do not have to live in the district or the ward. They do not have to be registered voters. They can live anywhere in the country. They have to be US citizens and 18 years of age. There is a recent amendment to the code that allows people who are 17 years old and registered to vote in the state of Illinois to circulate. So it's only 17-year-olds that have to be registered to vote and eligible to vote in the state of Illinois in order to be able to circulate. You want to train your circulators to ask anyone who is going to sign the petition if they are registered to vote, if they are registered at their current address, and if they are registered in the political subdivision that you're running in. And that's because in order to be a valid signature, the signature needs to be the signature of the voter. We call that genuine. It means to be from the voter's own hand. The voter needs to be registered at their current address to vote, and the voter must be registered to vote in the political subdivision you're running in. Because we're in a redistricting year, a lot of people might not actually know what district they're in, or they may think they're in a district that they're not in. So I may not have moved, but my district may have moved. My state Senate district, my state representative district might be different. Who I'm represented by today is not necessarily who I'm going to vote for next time. So you as the campaign need to be sure that you're educating the potential petition signers if they are in your district or if they're not in your district. So you want to have maps, you want to have minivan on your phone so that you can look people up. You want to be able to make sure that the people who are signing your signatures live and are qualified to sign the petition for you. Petition signers. Shell, I see your question there. I'm going to answer that separately because there is a new statute on that, and that's kind of outside the scope of what what the presentation is. And D, yes, I am saying that any circulator that is 18 years of age does not need to be a registered voter in the state of Illinois. Petition signers may sign and circulators may circulate for one party only. So there are a number of people who are going to tell you or think that you can only sign for one candidate in a particular race. That is a rule for nonpartisan races. Chicago alderman, for instance, it's not a rule for partisan races. So sometimes people get confused about that. If you have a partisan primary, you can sign for as many Democratic candidates as you want to, including candidates that are running against each other. What you cannot do is sign or circulate for a candidate in one party and then later try to sign or circulate for a candidate in another party. So you want to beware that when you're circulating petitions, you understand that if someone previously signed a Republican petition, they cannot sign a Democratic primary petition. If they've circulated a Republican petition this cycle previously, they cannot circulate a Democratic petition. And you need to be aware of that and ask your signatures, your signers and your circulators that question. The reality, though, is it's very difficult to object to a signature on this basis because, you know, let's say I sign a Republican petition for Darren Bailey, and then I sign a state Senate petition for Maria Peterson, who I see here. You know, it's going to be hard for someone to figure out that the same person has signed those two completely different petitions, but that is the rule. So if you don't have a maximum number of signatures, you can file as many signatures as you want. And the recommendation there is to file 3 times, but we'll talk a little bit in detail more about how you determine whether you've got enough signatures. So this is the form of the petition. This is a sample form from the State Board of Elections. And the top part of the petition is filled out by the campaign. So some campaigns you work for are going to use the form from the Board of Elections or from a county clerk, and they're going to fill in the information. Others are going to have a custom-made petition where all that information is typed in and filled in by a lawyer or by a company. The heading needs to be the same on every petition, and the circulator should not make any changes to the heading of the petition. Yes, this is a nonpartisan, but it's the same form. The only difference will be it says, "We, the undersigned qualified voters of the Democratic Party in whatever unit of government." But for our purposes, you know, the form is the same. So the top part of the petition is the campaign's domain. The part where it says name, voter's signature, voter's printed name, street address, this part of the petition is the voter's part of the petition and the petition signer's part of the petition. We're going to move on and talk about some rules for filling out that part of it. So this, as I said earlier, the circulator should not alter the heading of the petition. And that might happen sometimes where there are blanks in the top of the petition that the campaign doesn't fill out because they're not relevant to that particular campaign. And then the circulator sees the blank and tries to fill it out. So if you have one of those petitions, you want to make sure your circulators are not doing that. When you're circulating the petition and asking someone to sign, you want the petition signer to be in your presence when they sign the petition. So that means that you're not going to hand the petition to someone to walk into their house out of your view and get their husband upstairs or their son in the basement to sign it. It also means that you're not going to go to a political event and leave the petition down on a table and then go into another room and have dinner. And not watch people signing your petition, because I had a case where a candidate did that, and his opponent happened to be at the same event and stood there with his iPhone taking video of people signing the petitions while the candidate was sitting in the other room having dinner and schmoozing, and that caused a lot of problems for that candidate. So you want to make sure that you're present when the petition signer is signing the petition. I showed you on the form that there is a column for printed signature. That is not legally required. So if you see a petition where someone has decided not to put a printed signature column, that's totally fine. If you have someone signing the petition and they don't fill out the printed signature or the printed line, that's fine. As long as their signature is on there, the printed name is unnecessary. The reason a lot of campaigns do it is because if you have an objection filed to your petitions, it's often easier to look up the name of the voter and find the voter in the voter database if they have the printed name. In addition, a lot of people like to use the names to put them into the voter file and show that you've had a contact with them, or send them a postcard thanking them for signing the petition, saying you're on the ballot, and hope that you get their vote. So there are reasons for the printed column, but it's not legally necessary in order for a signature to be valid. Some people will print their name in the signature column. It is the signature that they use on the petition is supposed to match the signature that they use when they register to vote. So there are some people that will print their name as their signature when they register to vote. And if they print their name on the petition in the same way that they printed their name when they registered to vote, then that is going to be okay. A printed signature is not per se invalid because it's printed. A printed signature is only bad if it doesn't match the way that the voter signed when they registered to vote. Michael, next slide will have the answer to that. And we'll talk about what the signatures look like when we talk about vetting them, okay? If someone signs in the printed column and prints in the sign column, that's fine. You can use standard abbreviations, so CHI for Chicago, IL for Illinois. Standard abbreviations are fine as long as you can figure out what it stands for. When you're circulating petitions and a lot of people live on the same street or in the same city, sometimes people try to use ditto marks to make it easier to fill out the petition. Those are discouraged, but they're not per se invalid. I've never had a signature invalidated because of a ditto mark. People need to sign their own name and no one else's name. So you can't sign for your spouse, say, oh, my husband likes you, so I'm gonna sign his name too, or my child likes you, so I'm gonna sign her name. You can only sign for yourself and no one else. So I've said before that the signature itself needs to be in the hand of the person who is signing. That makes it a genuine signature. The circulator may write in the other information. The circulator may write out the printed name of the person. The circulator may write out the address. Sometimes you don't want this though, because you have to look at it from the perspective of someone who is opposing you and someone looking at your petitions with an eye toward whether or not to object. If I pull a set of petitions and I see a sheet where there are multiple lines that have the same handwriting, that's going to signal to me that there might be potential forgery and there might be fraud. So even though the circulator is allowed to write in the address, if the circulator writes in a lot of addresses, that's going to signal to your opponents that there is a possibility of fraud and that they might want to file an objection, and you want to avoid that. So sometimes I don't even tell circulators they're allowed to do that. I tell them no. And that way, maybe I miss a signature or two because someone's in a hurry, but it's better than getting a pattern of fraud objection. If you have someone with a broken arm or someone who's elderly and has difficulty writing, maybe once or twice during the process, you can let your circulator do that. But I do think it is not a great idea. If they want to make an X, it's fine if that is how they signed on the voter file. Sometimes people have sustained injuries and so they can't sign the way they used to sign. what happens then is if that petition is objected to, then you're going to do something called trying to rehabilitate the signature by getting an affidavit from the person, and the affidavit would say, this is my name, this is how I registered, this is how I signed, here's a copy of my driver's license, and I was in a car accident 2 years ago and I cannot write anymore, and here's how I signed my name, and this was my intent, right? So you can rehabilitate those signatures if they're objected to, but you definitely want to try to get people to sign their full name if they are able. Pen is preferred over pencil. I prefer blue pen over black pen. When we talk later about vetting signatures, what I'm going to suggest is that you copy the petition sheets and vet the copies. And sometimes if you have all black ink, it's difficult to tell what's the original and what's the copy. And you can only legally file the original, so you don't want to get them mixed up. So if you've got blue ink on the petitions and you copy them, it's going to be real easy to tell what is the original and what is the copy, and you're not going to mess that up. So the petition sheets have anywhere from 10 to 20 signatures on each page. One circulator per petition sheet. So you can't have one circulator go out and get 5 signatures on a sheet and then another circulator go out and get the other 5 signatures on the sheet. It's got to be one circulator per sheet. If you have a sheet where only one person signs and it's fully filled out, that's perfectly valid. If you have 7 people, 10 people, 12 people, whatever number sign, and it's notarized and filled out correctly, it's perfectly fine. So don't worry about having blank lines that are not filled out on a petition. The circulator should not cross signatures off. The middle of the petition is where the voters should be writing. You don't want your circulators getting used to putting ink to paper in that part of the petition, because that always raises issues of fraud. There is a process for certificate of deletions that we're going to talk about in a little while. So that's an exception to this rule. But you want the circulators, when they're out on the street and they're not with the campaign, not to be writing on the part of the petition that is for the petition signers. So a candidate may sign and circulate petition sheets. Sometimes that's a question, but of course the candidate may do that. I write carefully here because you don't want the candidate brought in to have to testify in an evidentiary hearing over an objection. So you want to make sure that the candidate is absolutely crossing all their T's and dotting their I's and not doing anything to raise any suspicion about their own signatures, because that is a huge distraction if the candidate themselves is accused of committing fraud. The circulator may sign their own petition sheet. That was a question in the chat. A notary may sign the petition sheet that they notarize, but the notary may not notarize a sheet that they circulate. So the notary is going to be notarizing the signature of the circulator, so they can't notarize their own signature. So the circulator can sign their own petition sheet. The notary can sign a petition sheet being circulated by someone else, but they can't circulate a sheet and notarize it. And then at the bottom of the petition is a sheet number with a blank. And that is not something for the circulator to fill out. That is something that the campaign fills out. That's usually the last thing that's done before the petitions are filed, is that they're numbered. And so you want your circulator to know not to fill that out. If they do just leave it until the end and then incorporate whatever numbers those are into the numbers where they are and make it look legible and nice. Don't cross them off, don't white them out. Try to just fix it so that it's legible. And you don't want to see a lot of crossouts, and you don't want to see any whiteout on the petitions. It's something that some of your circulators are absolutely going to do. Don't worry too much about it. Just fix it at the end. So here is the circulator affidavit, and this, so if the candidate is a notary, they are legally allowed to notarize sheets. I do not like that, because if I get an objection and I need the notary to come in and testify, one, I don't want the candidate spending time doing that. And number two, the candidate is a biased witness. I would much rather have more objective notaries coming in and testifying on my behalf. So yes, it's legal. I don't think it's a good idea. So here is the circulator affidavit, and this is not the actual circulator affidavit that you are going to use this cycle. And the reason for that is because it says that the signatures on this sheet were signed within 90 days. I was going to use an updated version of this. As you know from the earlier part of this presentation, we only have 60 days this cycle to circulate, so the 90 days is wrong. The problem is that the legislature, when they changed the dates, didn't change the language relating to the form of the petition. So the statute right now actually says 90 days, even though it's 60 days. The legislature, as I understand it, is going to fix this tomorrow. So I had really hoped that by today, I would be able to give you what the language would be. I believe what it's going to say, having looked at a draft of the language, is that the petitions were circulated between January 13th, 2022 and March 14th, 2022. And I expect that that's what the language will be. But I have not finalized any of my petitions and will not until the end of the day tomorrow when the legislature acts. And so unfortunately, you're all going to have to go find out the answer to that question on your own after the presentation, but be aware of it, because I know some people, I've seen some petitions printed already this cycle that still have the 90 days in them, and they're wrong. And I think that's going to get some candidates in trouble. So wait until the end of the day tomorrow, look up what the legislature passes and clarifies, and then make sure that your circulator affidavit is consistent with what the new code is. So on the circulator affidavit, you have a bunch of different sections. You've got the first section is state of and county of. State of Illinois, probably. The county of is where the affidavit was notarized, not circulated, not where they're running. It's where they were notarized. Yeah, I do believe that if they use the old language, that that's going to be a problem for candidates. I mean, I can't, guess what electoral boards are going to do, but it's a false statement, and you're swearing that it's true. So I do think it'll be a problem. So you fill out, I, Ed Mullen, certify that I reside at 1847, blah, 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 in the city of Chicago, zip code 60626, county of Cook, state of Illinois, and you need to make sure that you fill out all of that. There's a line for the circulator signature. You don't want to sign that until you are in front of a notary, because you have to have your signature on the petition notarized. So yes, the Board of Elections forms have been updated, but the legislature isn't bound by those forms. Whatever the legislature does tomorrow is either going to be consistent with what the State Board of Elections did, or it's going to supersede what the State Board of Elections did. But you have to follow what the legislature says, not what the Board of Elections says. Although I do think ultimately it will be consistent. Notary can be anywhere. The notarization has to be legal in the state of Illinois, so the person has to be an Illinois notary, but it doesn't matter geographically where it is signed. So the circulator's signature, wait until you're in front of a notary to actually sign it. Don't worry. Well, the notary is supposed to ask you for ID. So I always tell my circulator to take out their ID and show it to the notary, even if they don't ask, so that if they have to come in and testify, they can say that they always showed their ID to the notary. The bottom piece is basically for the notary to figure out or to fill out. So it says signed and sworn to or affirmed by, and this is supposed to be the name of the circulator. And it says name of circulator in the bottom, but you would be shocked at how many notaries put their own name in here, or how many circulators put the notary's name in here instead of the circulator's name. Don't do that, but it's actually not as huge of a problem as it sounds in most cases. Dated on the date that it's notarized, the notary public signs here, and then the notary public takes their seal and stamps the petition sheet. Should the circulator fit? It does not matter when the circulator fills out the affidavit, as long as it's not signed until all of the signatures are on the page and they're before the notary. So we went through a lot of this stuff when we're looking at the picture. So you fill out your name and address. The circulator should use their current address on the affidavit. It needs to be a place where the circulator can be found at that time. So there has been a lot of litigation recently about whether or not circulators are putting the appropriate address. If you live in the same place as you've always lived and you've got a driver's license and voter registration there, it's not a problem. If you're someone that's moved to work for the campaign and your driver's license is in Ohio and your voter registration is where you go to college in California, and you're sleeping on someone's couch this week and you're sleeping on someone's couch next week somewhere else, it's a little bit more complicated. But you want to think, if someone comes to check whether I live in a certain place, what is the best place for me to say that I am physically located at now? And there are probably multiple places for some people that would be okay. But the key is, if someone comes and tries to find you, to check to make sure that you actually circulated the petitions and did what you said you did, where is the easiest place for them to find you is the address that you should be using here. Don't add signatures after the affidavit is signed by the circulator. So if you go out and you get 8 signatures and then you sign it and you notarize it and it's sitting there, and then someone walks into the office and says, I want to sign a petition, use a new petition, not the one that's already been filled out, because you've sworn that the people that have already signed meet all the qualifications, but now you've got someone who's signing after you've sworn to that, and you don't want that. So the notary has 3 requirements. The notary is supposed to sign, date, and stamp the petition sheet. Those are the 3 things that are primarily required under the Notary Act. But what you'll find is that the Illinois Election Code says that you need to appear before a notary. It doesn't require that the notary do everything entirely correct. So there is a lot of electoral board law that says if you get 2 out of the 3 things correct, that's sufficient. I would not rely on that everywhere around the state, because there's not a Supreme Court case or an appellate court case. It's mostly electoral board decisions. So you want your candidates and your circulators to get all 3 of these right. But if you're missing one, don't throw the sheet out or put it in the garbage. Hold on to it, because that doesn't necessarily mean that it is bad. I don't encourage candidates to notarize other candidates' petitions. They should be focusing on their own, and they don't want to get drawn into another objection. If you live in a county other than it's notarized in, that's fine. You put your address where you live in the section where it asks where you live, and you put the address where you notarized it in the county of section. All right, so let's talk about some best practices. Train your circulators. Don't just hand people petitions and send them out. Go through these rules with them and make sure that they understand them and they're comfortable with them. You're going to do much better in terms of quality of signatures if you go door to door. Obviously, there are going to be issues with COVID, issues with knocking on people's doors when it's 10 degrees below zero. And from experience, I know that's painful on your knuckles and your hands after an hour or two, but it's a harder slog to get the number of petitions, but they're going to be much better quality petitions than if you go to train stations or if you go to grocery stores. And you're going to know that they're registered to vote because you're going to pick their door based on the voter file and the voter list that your campaign has. You want to try to make notaries available to circulators. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to have a notary in the office or a volunteer there when they come in, but know where the notaries are in your area. Know where the check cashing places that are open on the weekends and late at night are that someone can bring a petition to get notarized. Know which banks will notarize petitions for you. And if you have some volunteers that are notaries, have some petition notarization parties, have some pizza and invite people in to get their petitions notarized together, make it a fun event. But the more you do to help your circulators get notaries, the less likely petition sheets are just going to wander off and never get notarized after someone's done all the work to circulate them. And that's another reason that you want to notarize them as quickly as possible, because if you get, a petition sheet signed, you get all the signatures and then you don't get it notarized, and then the person has trouble getting back to notarize it, or they get sick, or they, have something else come up, then you've lost all that work. Vet your petition sheets and your signatures on a rolling basis. So when you vet your signature sheets, when they come back to the campaign, you want someone who knows all of this information that I've just given you to look at the petition and say, did they do it right? Because that tells you whether you trained them sufficiently, and if they're going to go out and circulate more petitions for them. If they made a mistake or they didn't do something as well as you want them to do, you want to be able to tell them. So don't just collect the petition sheet, look at it and make sure that it's filled out properly and there are no red flags that are jumping out at you when you see those petitions. Then you want to vet the signatures, particularly if you have a maximum, because your percentage needs to be high in order to stay on the ballot. And how you do that is you go to the election authority and you take your copies of your petitions and you sit there and you look up every voter and you see, does the signature match the signature that's on file? And this is where the question earlier about how do you know the signature, this is where you find that out. And unfortunately, you don't find it out on the street when you're talking to them, because those signatures are not public information. You've got to physically go to the election authority to do it. And you sit in front of the computer, you put in the information and you check, is the signature match? Do they live in the district? Are they registered at their current address? And is that the address that's on the petition? And if those things are all good, then it's a good petition signature, or it's a good petition signature and it's valid. And you want to do that early in the campaign. So don't wait until March 5th to take your petition sheets down and look at them. After you've sent people out for 2 weekends, have some of your volunteers go down and look at them. That's going to tell you, what is my validity rate? Am I training people sufficiently? Am I going to the right places to get signatures? And then you can adjust accordingly. You don't want to keep making the same mistake over and over and not be able to fix it until the end. Again, always use the copies of the petitions to vet, and if you want to do data entry, and secure the original petition somewhere safe where they're not going to have coffee spilled on them or someone's not going to walk away with them. When you have a maximum, part of the reason you want to vet is because you can do what's called a certificate of deletions. So if your maximum for state representative is 1,000 and you go out and collect 1,200, you can delete 200 of them and submit your best 1,000. And so to do that, you have to cross the petition signature off. The circulator or the candidate needs to initial that cross off, and then you need to add a certificate of deletions that lists the page and line number of the deletion. If you don't do all of those three things correctly, then the deletion doesn't matter, and that signature, even though you've drawn a line through it, will be counted as one of your first 1,000. I also recommend that you try to get a diversity of circulators and notaries. If you have a problem with an individual notary and that notary has notarized 90% of your petitions and all of those petitions get thrown out, you've got a serious problem. If you have a bad circulator who's done the same, you have a serious problem. If you've got a bunch of different notaries and you've got a bunch of different circulators, if you have a problem with one of them or they do something wrong, then you're less likely to have a problem with your whole set of petitions because they haven't done a huge amount of them. There's also an advantage to having notaries who are volunteers and are convenient for your people to use. But if you've got people who go to a bank, I had a litigation where they made this big scene about getting this notary to come in and testify, and they subpoenaed him, and he showed up and he had a notary book with him. He sat down, he showed that the person who was the circulator came in, the date, the time, and that he gave them his driver's license, and it was in this like bank book, and you know, that's perfect testimony. It's better than the candidate saying they notarized something because it's credible. So try to use a variety of different circulators and notaries so that you know, can be able to defend against any kind of challenge and not put all of your eggs in one basket with one person. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the objection process. And part of the reason I want to talk about the objection process is just because what you're trying to do is prevent an objection or survive an objection. And so if you understand the process, I think you understand a little more why it's important to follow all these rules that we talked about. So any registered voter in the political division can object. They have 5 business days, so they don't have a lot of time to review. But there are no sanctions in the electoral board for filing something frivolous. There are at some of the higher levels in court, but just to file a frivolous objection, the electoral board doesn't issue sanctions. It's a very expedited hearing process. For signature objections, they're going to just sit down and review every signature that's objected to and the basis for the objection and determine whether it's a good signature or a bad signature, and then tell you at the end of that process how many good signatures you have, and you want to be over the number that's the minimum when you do that. But there are also cases where you have evidentiary hearings and you serve subpoenas and you have circulators come in, you have notaries come in, you have people who sign the petition come in, you have the people that train the circulators come in. That's something you absolutely 100% want to avoid, and following the rules carefully will make you do that. Also, I do recommend that you pull the nominating papers of your opponents and see if they followed all these rules and whether there's basis to object to those. So this is what you don't want to see. This is what's called an appendix recapitulation that objects to signatures. And so you see it matches up with the petition sheets. So you got line 1, 2, 3, 4, it goes all the way down to the number of signatures. And so there's an objection that the signer is not registered at the address. There's an objection that the signature is not genuine. There's an objection that the signer resides outside the political division. So all of the things that we talked about making sure that you do for your signatures are the things that someone is going to object to if they don't. When you ask about whether a signature is valid or invalid, a signature is only invalid if someone objects to it. If someone doesn't object to a signature, it's valid. It counts. If someone objects to the signature, then you have to make sure that all of these things are done correctly. All right, and then this is the bottom of the same sheet that I just showed you. I showed you the top and this is the bottom, and these are objections to the petition sheet. So the circulator failed to sign the affidavit. The circulator is not a US citizen. What's more difficult about these objections is that they're for the whole sheet. So if a signature is bad for some reason, you just lose that signature. If a petition sheet is bad, then you lose all of the signatures on that sheet. So that's why you want to make sure that your circulators are well trained at filling out the circulator affidavit and your notaries are solid. Avoiding a pattern of fraud objection. Recruit and hire dependable circulators. Train circulators. I've said that 3 or 4 times, and I put it down again because it's really important. Don't assume that just because someone's done it before means that they know what they're doing, because rules change. Different offices have different rules. You want to make sure that you train your people to follow the procedures that are going to help you get on the ballot. When you go and vet your signature, do not change and correct the voter's address. They may have put down an address that's different than what they're registered at. If they did, that's not a good signature. You cannot cross off the address and write in an address that they're registered. That is fraud. That will cause you lots of problems. Verify the circulator addresses to the extent you can. If they're putting an address on the circulator affidavit, ask them if it matches their driver's license or their voter registration, and if it doesn't, ask them to explain why they chose the address, and make sure, because there's cases where people will send private investigators to the circulator address and see if they live there and object if they don't. And I have had more of those than I care to talk about. Review the petition sheets for signs of forgery. Do a lot of the signatures, a lot of the addresses look like they're in the same handwriting. Maybe you just want to take those sheets out of your filing. I often will take 2 or 3 sheets and recommend to my clients that they just don't file them with their nominating petitions because they look questionable and suspicious to me. Don't write on the petitions, except for deletions. Don't put white out. Those just raise suspicion. Even if it's completely innocent, you don't want to raise suspicion. Don't incentivize shortcuts. There's a lot of good people who do stupid things the day before petitions are due. Don't incentivize that. Start early, stay on track, so that at the end, you're not putting people in a position where they're going to do something stupid to try to get you on the ballot, because I've seen it happen to people that are, otherwise, very conscientious, and they just freak out at the end of the cycle and do things that they shouldn't do. So the sooner you start and the better the process is, and vetting and knowing what your validity rate is and knowing how you're progressing toward the number that is your goal, means that you're not going to have these problems at the end. So be consistent and start early. And that's it. I didn't think it was going to go this long. Sorry, I was going a little bit fast at the end because I had gotten over my allotted time, but more questions. Okay, so for people who recently moved, are you talking petition signatures? This is getting into like a kind of a level of detail, but they need to be registered at the address at the time they sign the petition. So it depends on when they move, right? So I don't want to go into all the permutations, but it's when they sign the petition, the address that they are registered at that time, and if it doesn't match at the time you're reviewing, you do see when they changed, and you can get the history. And I've done that before in litigation, but hopefully if you're doing this and you're doing it correctly, you're not worried about that one signature or that 2 signatures that has some odd question about it. You're getting 3 times the minimum, and you're doing all this vetting to make sure that those random ones that are potentially problematic just don't matter, and you don't have to worry about it. If the signer crosses out the address, just leave it. It won't count as a cross out, but just leave it. And if it turns out to be a bad address and you're doing deletions, then that's one you'll delete. Can multi-mode candidates appear on the same petitions? So you can. This is a question that you generally want to ask a lawyer, but the general rule is that if you're running in the same district and you have the same signature requirement and you're running in the same party, that you can be on the same ballot. So for instance, in Cook County, you know, the Cook County Democrats slated Kim Fox and Michael Cabanargi for state's attorney and clerk, and they were on the same petition. And the Water Reclamation District candidates were on the same petition, and the judicial candidates were on the same petition. So it is possible, but there are sometimes reasons why you can't do that, and so you just that's something that you definitely want to double check. Yeah, and if the question earlier about people moving, so I have litigated probably 5 or 6 cases in the last 2 years over circulators' addresses, and I've not lost one of them, but there are some cases where people have lost on the circulator address issue. So there isn't one perfect answer to which address. You just have to make sure that it's defensible and it's reasonable, and you know, make sure that your circulators are making a good faith effort to put down an address where they can be located, and that if someone goes to that address and says, "Hey, do you know Joe Smith?" they're going to say, "Yeah, he lived here. He moved, but he lived here last week." That's really it. What winds up happening is some of the sketchier companies that do petition circulation, their circulators have been subpoenaed before, and they don't like being subpoenaed, and they don't like being put under oath, so they put an old address, or they put a relative's address instead of putting their own address, and that gets them in trouble and gets the candidate in trouble. Election rules particular to secondary schools. I'm not sure what that means, sorry.
Okay. Well, we're about the allotted hour, Mr. Mullen. I just want to say thank you again for taking the time. If you got information out of this that was useful, then please consider supporting the IDCCA. We'll put a plug in the chat box. Also, if you need to hire an election attorney, I'm sure Mr. Mullen wouldn't be opposed to getting some business as well. So make sure that you support both of us. In addition, if you're not already following us on the usual social media platforms, please do. I'm sure we will have more excellent content coming up as the year progresses about what we're doing throughout the state and what folks are doing in their counties. So thank you again, Ed, for being with us tonight. Thank you everybody for being on the call. We are off and running. This election is going to be another doozy, I think, but I am hopeful. We are still in the battle for our democracy, I would say, and everything that you do between now and June, and then again in November, matters and is important. So thank you for giving your time, your energy, and your talents. And I will see you all soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.